Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to I Care About You, the podcast where we dive deep into our journey in life, how to make our adventure happier and more fulfilling, and how to work on those parts of ourselves that we wish we could shift. I'm your host, Juliana J., and I have a really wonderful guest today, Andy Campbell. Andy's going to tell you a lot about his life, so I'm not going to spend a long time introducing him, but he has gone through some major challenges in life, and he has developed a system of core beliefs that have helped him navigate life and come out on the other side in a more healthy and happy way of being. He's really suffered some tragedies, and without further ado, please welcome Andy Campbell to the pod. Today, I have an amazing, wonderful guest with me, Andy Campbell. He's going to talk about his journey, his life, the struggles, and life lessons that he's learned throughout this process. He's going to talk about the book he wrote in which he developed a really beautiful concept for how he lives his life and moves forward through whatever life brings, looking for joy and happiness and contentment. So welcome, welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and you have my gratitude for the opportunity to have the conversation with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Likewise. I think this is going to be a really rich conversation to so many of the listeners. If you could start a little bit telling us a little bit about yourself, what was your journey? How did you get here? How did you come to writing the book? And what have you been really working with through life?
Yeah, thank you. So, probably I would say I've had my fair share of challenges, whether that was early in life with sexual abuse. Some of it, yeah, more abusive than other parts of it, but always abusive, sexual abuse as a child. Um, that led to, I'm sure, contributed to my uh, less than optimal self-esteem, and which probably put me in a position where there was a lot of bullying that took place. I was not a large child, so not too difficult to take advantage of. And so I had some very difficult bullying times, and then. My mother was diagnosed at 42, who I loved dearly. She was diagnosed at 42 years of age with breast cancer and died at 53. She taught me more about living in the 11 years that she was dying than any other person in my life. Any other example I had for just things like courage and determination, grit, perseverance, no matter the outcome. And then after my mother's passing, I think she was really the tether that kept my father kind of held together, grounded. And without her, things didn't go well for him or for myself and my father. So we eventually became estranged. And by that time I had children. So in essence, he became estranged from his grandchildren. Um, and then at 53, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I don't know how I knew, but I knew 53 was not going to be a good year for cancer. My mother and three of her sisters had died from breast cancer in their 50s. My mother died at 53, but I was diagnosed at 53. And so began that journey. And then 4 years ago, 2.5, 3 years into the cancer journey, I found the body of my youngest son after he had taken his life. And he had told us for many years that he wasn't going to be with us long, that his time here was short lived, and then he would eventually take his life. And we did everything we could to convince him to stay, but eventually he made a decision that we didn't agree with. And so we live with what was left behind from that. So there were good parts, but I don't think our conversation is really about the good parts. So those are some of the highlights. There's many others, challenges that happened along the way, and I had some examples like my mother's determination through that. When I lost my son, eventually it came to me a story that my grandmother had told me about. She had six children, and this would have been back like in the 1930s. And her youngest son was under a year old, and he passed away. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that today wouldn't even like we wouldn't even it wouldn't exist, and if it did, we would take care of it. But she told me then that the moment he took his last breath, her vision, everything went gray. Like, so she just saw the world as gray. She would see you as gray. I mean, some shade of black and white, but everything was black and white. And she was a very religious woman, so she prayed and she read her Bible and she did it. And then she told me, she said one day, she didn't remember what day, but it was a while from the time that and the world just stayed gray, that she woke up and when she opened her eyes, she saw the sky was blue and the trees were green again.
Mm.
And she was, kind of telling me that there will be times when everything is gray, but don't quit. Eventually, color will return. If you stay long enough, if you stay engaged long enough, if you keep living long enough, the color will come back into your life. And I think when my son passed, that stuck with me. You know,
Mm.
so eventually you go through these things, and a few people, and one of my family physician was like, "You need to write a book." And he wanted me to write. Some people wanted me to write like a cancer book, like how to go through cancer and all the integrative kind of the integrative approach that we took to dealing with cancer. And I didn't want to really relive. If I talk about the cancer, then I'd have to talk about childhood sexual abuse, then I'd have to talk about this and suicide. So I decided, well, I had these 15 core beliefs. I think in pictures. So if you say words, I see them. I don't hear words. Like I hear words, but in my brain, they're not words, they're pictures. And so I had collected these things along the way, just like observations, kind of these philosophical observations or things that had helped me. I would look back and I'd be like, oh, that's kind of I needed to remember how I got through something. So I would create kind of like these little phrases, and they were like meta phrases, like they represented a lot of stuff, like they represented this whole picture to me, but it was just a phrase. And so I collected like 15 of them over the years. Exactly 15, actually. I collected 15 of them. And so one day I was like, well, if I'm going to write something, I'll use these subjects, these experiences, but I want to focus on something positive. I want to focus on cancer and which medication and which supplements I take. All interesting and important if you're going through cancer. Like I have a perspective on that. But what I really wanted to do was share these beliefs because I think they're higher level, more kind of universal. They can be applied universally. So there's not like a prescriptive way. It's not like, well, if you do this, then you get that. They're just kind of these larger ideas that if one of your listeners is stuck or they're in despair or they're not sure what to do or they're just about to give up, then then these one of these phrases and what it means might be something that you could apply and it would keep you from giving up today. Like
That's
you might not quit
beautiful.
today. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of the purpose behind it. That's how it ended up here.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing such intimate moments of your life so freely with all of us because I think so many of us struggle with some or all or part of what you're saying really resonates. I don't think that any of us make it through life without experiencing something really traumatic or more than once, not just once, but continually throughout life. And because it's such a taboo topic, a lot of what you're bringing up are these topics we are not really supposed to talk about. We have no language to talk about them, and people don't know how to communicate with you because you have no you have no language to talk about your own trauma, but then in receiving other people's trauma, you also have no language to help them or support them or even an understanding of how best to support folks. And that's what I love so much about your message of these core beliefs. And so to get kind of a handle on the core beliefs. So you have 15 core beliefs, which we're going to hear all about. That will be that I hope you will flesh them out a little bit for us. But you have these 15 core beliefs, and you sort of pick a few depending on what you're dealing with at the moment, or how do you work with them, and what are they?
Yeah. So I think maybe I can use this example. So I'd done 15 rounds of this. The chemotherapy I was in, because when you have pancreatic cancer, they just kind of throw the kitchen sink at it, right? Like they're like, I don't know. So it doesn't respond to a lot of stuff. Back then, there were no targeted therapies, right? So even 7 years ago, there was no target. They were just kind of exploring some.
Mhm.
But it was basically you had chemo or nothing. And the chemotherapy that I did was there were three chemotherapy drugs in the protocol. So I would go in for chemotherapy in the morning, so it's Monday. I get in, they hook me up and start around 9. I had IV ports they put in your chest where they can just plug into it so you're not constantly ruining your veins. And so they would hook me up and they would start like chemotherapy is not just the chemotherapy drug. They got to put a lot of stuff around it because they're basically poisoning you, right? So chemotherapy doesn't know to only most. I think there's some now that are better at it, but most chemotherapies don't know the difference between a healthy cell and a defective cell. They just kill everything, and you hope that you kill the defective cells faster than you kill the healthy cells. But I would go in, they took me up, and because they got to put glucose in because that transports the chemotherapy because the cells take up the glucose and then they take up the chemotherapy and then they got to put antihistamines, a bunch of antihistamines around it because you're absolutely going to have an allergic reaction to it, and then they don't want you to have too big of a reaction to it. And then they got to load you up with steroids because they know it's going to create inflammation. Then you get roid rage about 2 days after you do chemotherapy because you're ready to, you're full of steroids, so you're ready to like, punch somebody or joke, break something, and you don't know why. You don't know why you're so angry because you don't have the energy to do anything with the anger. You're too sick to do anything with the anger, but you're super angry. And then they kind of go, oh, yeah, yeah, we gave you a bunch of steroids. That's going to happen every time. But then they would hook me up to a pump. So that would take like 6, 7 hours to get through the first two and all the stuff they put around it. And then they would do this, the third one, they would put in a pump and they took the pump up to the port. And I would carry this bag around with me, this little shoulder pack. It was a little, not a bag, it was like this hard device inside of a bag. And you carry that around, and every 3 minutes, it would put a little bit of chemotherapy in your system for 42 hours, so basically 2 days. And that one was toxic enough that the first time they gave it to me, when I took it home, they gave me a hazmat bag. And they said, look, if the port comes out, in the unlikely event, the port, unhooks, or if the tube comes out and any of this spiffs, here's your hazmat bag, immediately call the fire department. And I said, you're putting in me, as long as it stays in me, I don't call the hazmat department. But if it comes out of me, it's so toxic, they have to have a hazmat event. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, what the
Wow.
hell are you doing to me? And so I did 15 rounds of those. I started getting really bad. I did pretty well for the first 11, pretty well. But at 12, I started having these really bad reactions. Really bad. Kind of felt like a vascular reaction or something like that. It's like you're on fire on the inside. You start sweating, but your heart's not. You don't have like an increased heart rate. My blood pressure was fine, but you just feel like you're dying. It's awful. But you're not going to die from it, but you feel like you're going to die from it. So man, at 12, it got bad, and then the 13th, 14th. After the 15th one, I really started thinking, I can't do this again. I'm like if you've seen a baseball, like where the threads start coming undone and then the leather on the outside starts pulling away. That's the way I felt my organs were internally. I couldn't see it, but that's the way it felt, like I was coming apart. I told my doctor, I was like, I'm thinking about quitting. He goes, no, you're having a good response and the tumor's getting smaller. And I was like, man, I'm telling you, I'm just going to walk out of your office. And I swear, I think I'm just going to start bleeding out. I'm just going to die. And you won't be able to save me because like I'm coming apart. Like things are just dissolving. It's the way it felt. And so I was thinking about this problem. And I think whether you believe in God, a higher power, source, or nothing at all, and we just have intuition about things, the right answer is usually a voice or a feeling that is quiet. It's like this soft, quiet thing. And then there's like this really loud thing that's telling you about all the things you should be afraid of, right? Like, oh my God, you're not thinking clearly. Here's all this. And I have figured out over time, probably don't listen to that voice. That voice is probably not helpful. Or say, like if you're facing a tiger and you're in, the jungle in India, that's probably a really good voice to listen to. Like, don't listen to the one that says, I think you can negotiate with the tiger. Listen to the one that says, run. Okay. But generally speaking, that's not the one to listen to. What my heart was telling me, what I knew to be the right answer was I had to stop. I couldn't go any further. And all I could think about, the loud voice was telling me all the negative things, the negative consequences. If I make that decision, here's what's going to happen. You're going to die a super painful death. It's going to come back. You will have already said that you stopped. And if you decided you want to go back on, it probably won't be effective anymore. And then you'll leave your wife behind and you'll leave your children behind. Like there was this list of things that kept telling me.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided I had to quit. So I decided to quit. Like the soft voice was like, got to quit. And quitting is not really what I'm into. Like a lot of what I tell people is don't quit. But in this case, it was like, it felt like quitting. I'll say it that way. It felt like quitting. And it turns out, though, that 90 days after I decided to quit, without getting into all the details of everything that happened, I did a 10-day water only fast and a 5-day fast and I did all this stuff. In that 90 days, my daughter, who was now a doctor, found for me a trial at the University of Pennsylvania in a specialty clinic there with a wonderful oncologist. She's like, yeah, she's just wonderful. And as a human being, she's wonderful. She's super smart, but as a human being, she's a wonderful human being. And it was the only place, probably in the world, but certainly in the US, that was doing a trial for pancreatic cancer patients with the same genetic mutation that I have. Yeah, it was like the only place to go.
Mm-hmm.
So if I hadn't, and then I got there and they said, how many rounds of chemo did you do? And I said, well, I did 16. But I did one more after I quit. They taught me to do one more. And they were like, oh my God, nobody does more. You can't do more than 8 of those.
Wow.
You were never like, if you had a positive response, you were supposed to stop at 8. No more than 8. Should have stopped before. And I was like, no, I did 16. And they're like, well, first of all, not many people do 16, not at that high a dose. And secondly, like if you had kept doing it, if the cancer had ever become resistant to the chemo, you couldn't, this drug wouldn't work.
Mm.
But because you stopped when you were still having a good response, this drug will probably work. And it did. It was two drugs,
Oh.
and it did. I'm still on one of the drugs. It was just delivered a few minutes ago, actually. Um, so what I took from it, I appreciate you letting me kind of paint the picture here, but I
Yeah.
know it's long. But what I took from that was just kind of the second in the list of core beliefs was there are no hard decisions, only hard consequences. And I really say perceived hard consequences because that loud voice never told me that if I quit, it never dawned on me that one of the consequences of doing what I knew to be the right thing, which was actually, it was not a hard decision. It was the chemo was killing me faster than the cancer. It was not a hard decision.
Hmm.
I knew what I had to do. Now, the consequence, I never thought of the consequence being, oh, and if you do that, 90 days from now, you'll get into a trial, it'll save your life. Like you won't have to do chemo anymore. That consequence was not in my list of possible consequences. And so I realized I wrote down, there are no hard decisions, there are only hard consequences, because it kind of dawned on me. I think what humans do is most decisions we know what we should do,
Hmm.
and then we think about the potential consequences, and then we pick up the difficulty of the consequences and we move it over and set it on top of the decision, and we'll say, "I don't know, that's a hard decision." And I've just gotten to where I kind of call BS on that with people. I'm like, no, it's not. No, I bet you know what decision you're supposed to make. I bet if you set the consequences back, took it off the decision and set the consequences to the side, and just asked yourself, what should you do? Forget the consequences. What is your heart? What is your intuition telling you
Hmm.
that you should do? What's that quiet voice saying to you? And I think people should follow that and then face the consequences because usually they're not the same consequences that you thought they were, right? Like it's
Right.
just it is. So that's kind of how I get through these things. And now I have it written down so I can go back to when I have a decision and it appears to be a hard decision. That reminds me, go through the process of separating the consequences. Now, what would you do? If there were no consequences, what would you do? Well, I would do this.
Hmm.
Is that small voice telling you that's the right thing to do? Probably not the right thing to do if you took off the consequences and the decision was to cheat on your spouse. You might want to. Is the quiet voice really telling you to do that? No, it's probably telling you to be a little more disciplined, to maybe do the right thing, like not hurt somebody. That might be, like. So
Right.
I just try to remind myself that little meta phrase just says, it's probably not a hard decision. You probably know what you should do. You're fearful of the consequences, and you don't even know if those consequences are real. So keep the difficulty on the consequences and stop lying to yourself and telling yourself that this is a hard decision. So that's the way I look at all of them. I just work to remember that to me they all hold like a little kernel of truth.
Mhm.
It's not like it's not like a prescriptive thing or absolute, but it's just something to remember.
Right, right, right. What advice would you have for people who are having a hard time tapping into that quiet voice? Or I think so many of us in this first stages of really trying to trust our intuition or that quiet voice. Side of our mind, it's just reeling with all these things, especially difficult decisions. And finding the quiet voice can sometimes be so hard. Do you have any advice for folks to just really, how do you know that's your intuition, that's your quiet voice, that's, your heart speaking versus all of the other noise that's happening? Because sometimes it can sound very convincing, right?
I would say that all of these for me, all these core beliefs, they are things that I believe in. They're aspirational. Okay. I do not sit here to pretend that I do them like in some robotically perfect fashion every day. I fail at them. I don't get them right. I do like get confused. Which is that really like is that the voice? Is that like is this what I'm supposed to do or not? So I don't want your listeners to think like oh it's saying like I could if I just read these things and it's not like that. I think that's a great question and I appreciate it. When I was going through chemotherapy, I really didn't know how to do this. Okay,
Mhm.
I didn't know how to do this when I was going through chemotherapy, my physician said, "Hey, there's a lot of studies out about acupuncture and how it helps with getting your energy centers lined up again, and you're going to need energy to go through the treatments, and it helps with your body's like your kidney, spleen, and everything, detoxing the liver, detoxing. There's all kind of studies around. They don't understand it, but it works. And so, would you try it?" I said, "Yeah, like I'm dying. I got no options. Sure, line me up." And same thing when you say guided imagery. It was like, "Yeah, there's all this stuff. Like, stop convincing me. Tell me where I go." And I found through acupuncture inadvertently, I think it did do exactly what he said. I saw the results of it, right? Like I would grow into the acupuncturist who was a physician also, but he was by then retired and into into Eastern medicine his whole life, and so he became an acupuncturist. But I would go in gray, leaning against the wall with no energy, trying to walk. They would help me walk to the
Mhm.
table and the room, and I would lay down in this. But I found after a few of those sessions that as soon as he started putting, I would go into this deep meditative state. And I didn't try. It was just, I was so exhausted and it was just so perfectly relaxing that okay, were the needles, because it wasn't like one protocol. He had I was in bad shape. So he did I looked like a pincushion.
Mhm.
Um, but the moment he started putting the needles in, I became like Pavlov's dog and I just like found myself in this meditative state.
Mhm.
Well, I didn't know it was meditative. It was just, he called it the zone. I would just fall into this, like everything would just kind of go dark. My mind would just quiet down. And I could kind of, it was probably in one of those where like the first thought was like, you can't keep doing this. Um, and then I found with like guided imagery, kind of the same thing would happen. You go through almost like in this light hypnotic state. And I found like this really peaceful place. And even though I couldn't really think while I was there, somehow like my subconscious could think. My conscious mind was out of the way, and my
Mhm.
subconscious mind could think. Um, and so, I work to do these breathing exercises like heart math. I don't do them disciplined enough fashion. I guess that what I'm working to communicate is I think it is the reason they call it a practice is because a Reiki is another great way to like for me to kind of find that quiet place and let that energy just kind of come through you. And so I don't know that there's like a prescriptive way. I've done all and still do all of those things
Mhm.
because what I know is I'm not really good at meditating. So if people say, well, just meditate. I'm like, yeah, okay, like that's really hard for me. Like my
Right.
mind will wander and I'm just not. So I have to pursue things to find that quiet place that are kind of like I kind of have to do something to get there, and somebody else has to do something with me to help me get there. So
Mhm.
I just accept that. Like I just accept that's my way. And once you get there, I think if we can get our minds quieted, whether that's through your own meditation, some people use prayer for that, and like a state of gratitude for that. Whatever that means is, I think part of our obligation is to have a pursuit of that,
Mm.
and that by pursuing it, eventually we will find one thing that works for us. We will find, like for my oldest son, for him, that is being in nature.
Mhm.
He finds God in nature, in the natural created world is where he doesn't find peace in man-made places. He likes to go to the national parks or travel, but he doesn't travel to travel. He actually travels to get to a place where nobody else is, so
Right.
that he can just sit, and that's where he finds his quiet space. So I think I don't have a prescriptive answer for how you get there, but I think when you get there, somehow, like being in that place, I think it, I think it becomes. A friend of mine used to tell me about something. He would say, "Well, Andy, that's intuitively obvious to even the casual observer." And I think like when you find your way of getting to that quiet place, and that's a pursuit, it won't just show up, you know. And just like you don't go to a party, it just doesn't show up. You got to go to the party, and you got to go to the concert. You got to go do something. Well, I think it's the same way we find in the quiet place, like you got to pursue that. So whatever way works for you, I think it becomes your intuition becomes more intuitively obvious when you get into that quiet place. And my experience has been the least loud voice is the one that's probably more truth than the others. I
Nice.
don't know if that answers your question, but that's
No, I love that. I actually talk about that in my book, The Pursuit of, like you don't know where you're going to find this healing, and it's a pursuit. I love that word pursuit because that's exactly what it is, that you're looking for the space that works for you. And I think, those of us in countries that use a lot of Western medicine, we are really conditioned to think it's, this lane or this lane or this lane. And so we spend all of our time trying to meditate or trying to do these things, but really it's in nature or walking down the street or writing or journaling or sitting quietly or not sitting quietly or, in the noise of traffic or wherever that might
right.
be.
Exactly.
It's different for everyone. And I so appreciate you saying that because it really gives people permission to find what works for them that isn't that guru answer that we all think we're supposed to come to. And I love that the quietest voice is probably has the most truth.
As a rule, like
I
I'm
love
not
it.
telling everybody, like don't come back to me and go, I listened to the quiet voice, it didn't work out. I'm just saying as a rule,
Right.
it's like, well, if there's a number of kind of softer voice, what's the quietest one? Because I think the quietest voice is the one that is probably least fearful, least anxious, and that's why it's quiet. And
Right.
that's why I think you have to pursue a quiet mind because I don't like that's the only way you can hear it, And I spent a lot of time, some of the things I've been through. I spent a lot of times pursuing almost like loud things, to try to drown out the loud voice, like even louder things or, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, like just a loud music, loud thing. And I think, and I enjoyed a lot of those things. I'm not saying
Hmm.
I didn't enjoy it, but I think like a lot of times I was trying to find something louder than the
Right.
loud voice. And then I didn't like know to do that. It's just I think through the cancer treatment and doing the acupuncture and the guided imagery, I became too tired. I was unable to do things that would drown out the loud voice. I ended up being so weak that I could only I did things where the loud voice didn't exist, like it couldn't come into the quiet place. I don't know
Right.
if that makes sense. It's like, I spent all this energy trying to drown out the loud voice when really the more peaceful like finding the soft voice was not doing things to drown out the loud voice. It was getting to a place where I could only hear the soft voice. And like I said, I don't think there is like that, there's a lot of gurus and they all have good advice. I
Hmm.
just don't think I don't think any one of them have the one way that works for every individual. Like there's eight billion of us, okay, like, and we're all unique, we're all different. There's none of us that are the same. And so I just don't see how one solution can be right if none of us are the same. Like you got to find, but I do think there are principles that you can pursue that then will help each of us find our place where that can happen. Like I think the principle is probably the least loud voice, the quietest of the voices is the one to listen to. So then my job is to is to is to work and pursue finding some method that will help me get to that spot. Because I do think it's just exhausting. I don't know if any listeners have had this experience, but I do think it's exhausting trying to drown out the loud voice.
Hmm.
It's just exhausting, because it's like, well, how much drugs can you do? How much sex can you have? Finding that momentary pleasure. How much alcohol can you drink? How much working out can you do? How much running can you do? How much? And it's all like trying to drown it out. And it's like, those are all the wrong pursuits. You're never going to drown that. The loud voice just gets louder. And
Right.
whatever it is that you do, you stop that. The loud voice is just sitting there tapping on your brain, I'm here. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I know I'm rambling, so I'll stop. But yeah.
No, no, that's so, I think so many people can resonate with that. That's exactly we're so hardwired to always go to the negative of everything. And that's that kind of loud voice a lot of the time. And if we can
Yeah.
recognize that as, oh, that's my negativity bias, or that's my, however you want to explain it or talk about it, that's my anxiety, that's whatever that is. And just in the ability to notice that that's what that is, rather than it's not you.
Hmm.
That's this
Yeah.
thing that you're conditioned to go to. And once you can kind of make that distinction, it's easier to notice it when it happens. But I remember when I first started doing this kind of work, just noticing that wasn't the case. This is not the truth. This is not the truth. This is just a thought was hard, but now it's fairly easy. But at the time, I just remember that being so, I don't know, is that the truth? Because you don't trust yourself. Because so much of that loud voice creates this distrust of that you have for your own self and your own ability to make the right decision for yourself. And that can be so hard to kind of overcome.
Oh,
Um,
I look, I agree. And I think I have come to believe that our experiences, like for me, like early on with, this is why I think, sexual abuse is so heinous, really, because at that age, you have no, like it breaks all of your perceptions of the world or what could be perception. You go from, kind of a comforting womb to, like some level of happiness and joy, like you're a child. And then all that's just taken away from you.
right.
And and what's replaced with or what for me, what it replaced, what was replaced or what replaced that happiness or that trusting nature or that, was a distrust of everything.
Mhm.
Everything's bad, so watch out for it. Trust no one, trust no situation. No one is loyal. people will lie, all these. And there's some truth to those, which is kind of how I came up with, eventually I came up with this core belief that only be religious about religion, because don't be religious about everything that's not religion. You got your religion, have your dogma. I'm a religious person. I have a dogma, but that doesn't serve you well in everything else. So like, and we can, and like for me, after, as I grew up, part of my religious belief, I don't mean like associated religion, but part of like my dogma became
Mhm.
trust no one, and it's like, well, should you really be religious about trusting no one? Like that's going to be like a core belief of yours is trust no one, no one's loyal, like all these negative thoughts. That's where you're going to be. And so, how can you trust the inner voice when you basically have had these things happen to you that cause you not to trust anything,
Right.
and least of all yourself? Because look at what you got I mean, it's later in life that you realize somebody did that. You didn't, you couldn't have consented or agreed to, right? But all that
Right.
time, like there's so many questions, like you say, it's like, well, can I even trust myself? Look at the bad decisions I've made. Like, yeah, it is difficult. It is uncertain. Your life is valuable. You're a thread in the fabric of the universe. Ignore how you feel about yourself today. Ignore how you think other people feel about you. Just know that you are valuable and that your pursuit of peace, your pursuit of finding that quiet mind is a noble and honorable pursuit because
Mhm.
you're valuable. And so you should pursue that. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be uncertain. It won't happen today. It'll take time, might even take years. One day you'll look back on it and realize that the pursuit of it was actually part of the piece itself.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
pursuing that kept you from pursuing other things. And so just, don't quit. Just continue the pursuit.
I love that. And I love that you've thrown in this bit of fluidity. Be curious rather than regimented. I is
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's
Well,
so
that's another one, right? Like be insatiably curious, and I think those two kind of counterweight each other. It's like how if you're religious about, like my wife and I, we've been together 37 years. At some point, been married 37 years. At some point, I just can't be religious about every damn argument we have. Okay. Like I just, like I can't just be like, I am going to the mattresses on the,
yeah.
come on, man. It's where you're gonna eat dinner. Okay. It's like, okay, you don't like that she didn't put the utensils in the top rack of the dishwasher the way you do, which by the way, I don't. Okay. There's a way to put those in and not a way to put them in. Okay. Like let's be clear about that. I'm right, she's wrong. But the point is, and her point that she's made to me, which is correct, is it does it really matter? They come out clean every time. Does it really matter? And I have to remind myself, Andy, you're being a little religious about where we put the utensils in the dishwasher. Okay. Like, what is the objective here? It is to have clean utensils. Then let go of where, like, which way they face. And, it's like maybe you're just being a little OCD. Okay. That's
Yeah.
not her fault. So, like, are we really going to have an argument over this? Um, and so I think that how can you be insatiably curious? How can you find new things if you're so religious about things that are not your goal? Like I'm kind of like, okay, so you can be religious about your goal, but do you have to be religious about how you achieve the goal? Because
Right.
and make sure you got the right goal in mind. Like I mean, I know it's silly, but I use that like utensils in the top rack of the dishwasher. Is the goal to have the utensils lined up a particular way, or is the goal to have clean utensils?
Right.
I would say, yeah, insatiable curiosity is super important because being curious is how you find that therapist that can actually help you instead of the 10 that aren't really good for you. I mean, that's being curious is how you find the three supplements that you're going to take to help you with your cancer treatment. Being curious is how find that way that fits you to find that quiet place so you can find the, like, curiosity is really good. It's really important. And if you're religious, if you just have that dogma, like I'm willing to sacrifice myself on for this thing, I think it prevents one from being curious.
Hmm. It's true. It's true. Yeah. And you get into a space of always defending these things that have become rigid in your belief system. And that can challenge your relationships, like you were saying, with you were religious about
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. And then I gave up. I gave up on the dishwasher, and we actually like enjoyed dinner instead of arguing about the
Right.
dishwasher. And it's like wow, So we could have been enjoying our time together had I just let go of the damn top shelf of the dishwasher sooner. You know. And
Right.
so yeah. all these core beliefs, I see them kind of the same way. They're not prescriptive. They're not something that, tells people if you do X, you get Y. They're
Mhm.
just these things that are, that I think I've observed that I think broadly they kind of hold true. And so if somebody were to read one and adopt it, I think that comes with the condition that you have to adapt it to you and
Mhm.
to your situation. So I don't intend them to be prescriptive because they're not prescriptive for me. They're things that remind me to think about situations differently. Just think about them. So that's what they're kind of there for, is to help me. It's not to answer the question, it's to make me think about the question.
Oh, nice. I love that. I love that because we're so conditioned to be, we get the answer, we move on. But really, that's not the journey of life, right? It's a journey. And so,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I really love that. It kind of just creates this space where, and things change throughout your life, right? However you thought about the world when you were 18 is totally different at 25, 35, 45, 55, and so on, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's
So,
100% true. I talked to this lady one time, and she told me that she had had suicidal ideations. And we were talking about, at that moment, we were talking about my son, and she said, "Yeah, when I was when I was 16, I really I was going to kill myself." And I said, "Well, what stopped you from following through?" And she said, "Well, I had this thought that my life would be different when I was 19,
mm,
and I just needed to wait to 19 and then decide." And by the time I got to 19, everything had changed and I didn't want to kill myself anymore. And I didn't write it down because of that, but another one is equations are constant, but variables are constantly changing. And I think I got that as I studied finance. And so there's all these equations, it's like mathematical equations, and they don't vary. They are what they are. And they have a number of variables, and then they have a number of interactions between the variables plus, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, right? But the equation works every time. It works. And you don't know what the summation is because you don't know what the variables are. You got to plug those variables in. But the equation, you plug in the variables, the equation works. You will get the correct summation. Okay, like
mhm,
it functions.
right.
But it dawned on me that the variables are what control the outcome, not the equation. And so to me, like the universe is the equation, like life. There's an equation for life. Some of those variables you get to decide. You decide what variable that is. Some variables the universe decides. Well, it's like it's designed this way, and so this is the variable, right?
Right.
Some variables other people decide, like they make their own decisions, and those can have impacts on us. But tomorrow, the summation of that equation will be completely different because the variables will change. And so you do not end your life because you think the summation of your life is what it is at this moment. It's not. Give give the universe a chance, whatever length of time it needs. Give the universe a chance to change the summation of your equation, right? Like give it a chance. Like this lady waited when she was 16, she just decided wait till 90. Give it more time, and when you give it more time and it's still not there, give it more time, because every moment you have changed the summation of that, or you change the equation of your life. You may not see it, it may be imperceptible at the moment, but it has.
Mm,
Nothing is today as it was yesterday, and it won't be the same tomorrow. And so if you're in the state of despair and you just think there's no way you can keep going, you see, I can keep going, but there's no reason to keep going. I would just ask you, please reconsider. The summation of your life has not been written. What is possible has not been determined. And so, you know, give the universe a chance to change the variables in your equation.
right, right. Yeah, I love that. And it's so true because, yeah, I think that's another trap that we get into when things are not going well in our lives. We think it's permanent. But change is not, the world is constantly changing. Nothing is permanent, but we think this moment of despair or this moment of feeling is it worth it or this moment of being in extreme financial stress or worry about your future or all these things we think are so permanent and are not really. They're fleeting in our lives, are coming and going. It all depends on what the variables are in the equation. I really love that because it gives you the power to plug in your own variables, which I think is another thing we don't do because we're so conditioned to think what others expect of us. But
Yes.
our quiet
Yes.
voice is probably telling us what the variables are.
Yeah. You can plug in whatever number you want to into that. I mean, just because the equation is constant and it has this many variables in it, and they function this way. You can put in whatever number you want to in that, and you may not feel like you can today, and maybe you can't today, but you can over time. Like you can affect change on the outcome, and you may feel completely powerless at this moment. You may feel like you can't, but that's in this moment. Don't quit on because of this moment. And I think it kind of goes back to what we are talking about before, like where there are no hard decisions, only hard consequences. I've been in financial situations where I just could not see a way out. I just could not see a way out. And yet there was a way out. And part of it is because I think our circumstances, our history, the experiences that we've had, compounded by just, I think, human nature, right? Like it amplifies maybe like human nature to risk manage. Like I said, don't get eaten by that tiger. Generally, what we think, or what I would say to myself, I'll speak for myself. When I've been in those situations, pretty much all I can think about are the bad outcomes.
Hmm.
You know, it's
Right.
really it's hard for me. I have to work. Kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like so coming out of my background, I catastrophize everything. If
Hmm.
it rained, there would be a tornado.
Right.
If there was a tornado, it probably hit my house. If there was a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, it's probably going to be a hurricane. It's probably going to do it. Like it didn't matter what it was. If I didn't hear from one of my children if I called and they didn't answer, they might be dead on the side. Like it was always the worst possible outcome,
Hmm.
which a therapist helped me understand. It's like, well, that's reasonable based on your experiences. It's not right, but I understand why you do it. And that helped me understand why I did it, right? Like,
Hmm.
or why, and I still struggle with that because it's just so ingrained in me. I have to think my way through things to say, well, okay, so if it's a catastrophe, there's nothing you're not going to change that anyway. Like it's going to be a catastrophe. But let's say for a moment it's not going to be a catastrophe. Now, what might it be? Like I said, with stopping the chemo, I had no idea that 3 months later I would end up in a trial. Like I couldn't foresee that. I think most things as a matter of fact, nobody being a precise fortune teller of exactly what's going to happen tomorrow is super difficult. I don't
Right.
know if anybody can really do that. Like, I've been to a meeting before, but it's kind of like general over the hill. It's like, it's telling me something about, this person wants to talk. I'm like, tell me what's going to happen at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And it's just a guess. And so if it's like, we're all making that guess when we look into the future. We don't, and our guesses are almost always to the worst outcome. Like we don't guess like, by tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, I actually believe I will have a solution to my financial condition.
Right.
Nobody says that, like, well, nobody I know says that. I don't say that. And so, but it's like, well, that is equally as possible as the really bad outcome. Like you
True.
don't know.
Right.
And so that's why I think it's just so important to not make, I used to tell my son, don't make an irreversible decision. So my what I would share with people is just because you think you know what's going to happen, at least don't make an irreversible decision. Okay. Make a decision that just in case it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be, you can back your way out of that decision.
Right.
I mean, like if you feel like I got to make a decision, don't make an irreversible decision. Because if you kill yourself, it might be that an hour after you killed yourself, the answer was like had shown up and you missed it. Like give it a chance. So I just think I don't think that's hope in a sense, like like a wasted hope, like just kind of a. I just think it's like the universe has kind of proven that's the way it works. You just have to give it time. I think generally speaking, the universe is in our favor.
Hmm.
Like I think it's that like I've had plenty of days where I felt like the universe was against me, like
Right.
maybe months, maybe years, where I felt like the universe was against me.
Right.
I've come to a place where I'm like, well, I don't know that it is actually against us. I think we're against ourselves a lot.
Hmm.
Like we do a lot of stupid stuff,
Right.
and we do a lot of stuff that's not in our, it's not optimal for our health or our happiness. But I think the universe is kind of like, yeah, I'm on your side most of the time. I think it's other people might not be on our side, but the universe is bigger than other people. We might not be on our side, but the universe, but we'll take our bad decisions and then go, the universe is against me. It's like, well, maybe it wasn't against you. Maybe you just made a bad decision. Take
Right.
responsibility for the bad decision and work to not make that one again. Time exists for a reason. It's like we live in these four dimensions, and time is for a reason. So we should give time an opportunity to work things out for us. And I said that I don't do that very well, but I do believe that that's how we should do it.
It's hard to do that. I hear you there, and it's
Yeah,
true. It's true. Like the things change. Things change. I think we sometimes get into that space where we think nothing will change. We're also struggling with this feel like powerlessness within ourselves,
yeah,
like we can't
yeah.
we can't do it, so we're just going to sit here forever. It's your life story really says so much about conjuring up your strength to go to the next place when you're feeling like, oh, I just don't really have the power to fix this, but to conjure up your strength, I think is so, and just take that step or whatever small thing you can do to move forward, I think is kind of also
Yeah,
important.
that is very important. I think I saw this thing one time. Uh, so you know the saying like, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time, you
Hmm.
know? And I saw this video of these hyenas. I don't know how it's like, I don't know where I was at YouTube something, and I see this video, and it's there's this massive bull elephant that's died. Okay, and these hyenas come upon, and that's like God's buffet for them, right? Like they're like a whole elephant just for us. But it turns out that every part of the elephant is too tough for them to bite through.
Mm.
They can't get to the meat. They can't get to the organs. They can't get to what it is that they need to get through. So how do they eat that elephant one bite at a time when the elephant is too tough to eat through? Well, it turns out that the only soft place that they can start at is the anus.
Mm.
The shittiest place is where they have to start eating the elephant one bite at a time. And if they work their way through that, then they can get to the really good stuff. That's what they want, right? But they got to go through, the back end of the elephant to get to the front end. They can't start at the front end and
Totally.
avoid that. And I think we just, a lot of times we're like, well, I just want to eat the elephant, or there's like this big thing. I remember one time long ago, my wife and I had just gotten married, and we tried to start a business, and it went well, but didn't go well. And I was having trouble paying some bills. And I was in a place where I was like, well, I can't pay it all. I just won't pay anything. And her view of that was, no, we will send them $25 a week, $25 a month, whatever it was. It was, I mean, back then it was like we didn't have a whole lot, so just like whatever. And they would call and they would raise hell, and they were like, "Oh, you owe us this money." I got nothing. And when they started getting that $25 regular, they stopped hounding us.
Mm.
And it probably took like 3 years of her just doing these really small steps. I mean, this was thousands of dollars, and she sent her $25. And I was like, why even bother? And she's like, well, if we just take this small step, if we just do something, they'll start leaving us alone, and eventually we'll pay it off. And I was like, it'll never happen. Like, but why just do? So between that lesson and the hyenas, I think what you said is just really, really important. Take the small step. That's what I learned from my wife in that situation. It's like, you know what? You may feel like you don't have the power to take the big step right now, and you don't. Except I did not have the power to pay off that debt
Right.
the way I wanted to. But sometimes the big thing that we are powerless to do is what we want. The thing we have the power to do, we don't want that. I didn't want to pay $25 a week or a month, whatever it was, for 3 years. I didn't want that. I wanted to do this. But I
Right.
was powerless to do. I had no power to do that. And so she comes along. She's like, well, we do have the power to send them $25 a week. I didn't want that. But what I learned from that was, small steps matter.
Mm.
And so if you don't feel like you have the power to do this big thing, break it down into small enough pieces until you find something you do have the power to do and do that. And then eventually that little bit of power might lead you to being able to have the power to do something bigger. And eventually, through my wife's persistence, I had the power to pay off the whole thing. I actually did end up having the power to pay back the debt. I just had to do it a different way.
Right.
And the biggest challenge I had with doing it the other way was I didn't want to.
Hmm.
I wanted the power to fix the problem all at one time. And so that was just kind of, I mean, I took that lesson from that. It's like break it down into a small enough piece that you do have power to do that. And then don't discount it. Because anything you have the power to do and you do it, that's a good thing. You have that much power.
Right, right. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. That's true. Yeah, love all of it. Well, in our last couple minutes, Andy, I could talk to you all day. This is fascinating and wonderful, and there's so many wonderful takeaways. But in the last couple of minutes, let's circle back to your book so that people will know where to go to find your core beliefs and how you work with them. So tell us about the book.
Yeah, so the book you can find it on Amazon. Just the easiest thing to do is go into the search bar on Amazon and just search for my name, Andy Campbell, And I think it'll be the first search result that comes back. I also have a website called askandycampbell.com. And I don't have that because like I'm, arrogant enough to think you should ask me per se. But people used to ask me like, how are you still alive? And so like somebody would say, they would ask a friend, they go, oh, well, ask Andy Campbell, he's still alive. Like they would have cancer, and they said, well, like, how am I going to get through this? They're like, well, ask Andy Campbell. He did some stuff. He's still alive. So my website address is askandycampbell.com. You can find me there, and if you know somebody who has cancer, I've got again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving medical advice, but you can find things about my story and all the 45 supplements and minerals and stuff I take every day, and kind of like my approach to surviving. So the book it's a pretty short read. Um, in one part of the book, I go through the core beliefs and just a short little bit about each one of them, kind of my view on. And then the second half of the book is things that you can do to help that I believe one can do to help oneself survive. Mindfulness, community. It's all these things that you kind of wrap around so that you can survive and eventually thrive.
Great. What's the name of your book? You haven't told us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I told you about it and I didn't tell you about it. The name of the book is Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, 15 Core Beliefs to Turn Challenges into Opportunities. Because I do believe that part of this is all of these challenges that show up. I don't think they show up to give us opportunities, but I do believe that even in the middle of these really difficult setbacks, there are opportunities that will be presented to us. And we have to be curious enough to take those opportunities in spite of the pain that they might be associated with, right? Like the opportunity is still there. And we should at least get something out of having to go through it, right?
Right.
So 15 overcoming life's toughest setbacks, 15 core beliefs to transform challenges into opportunities.
Great, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been such a pleasure having you. I've so appreciate this conversation and you coming to it with such openness and willingness to share parts of your life that will help the rest of us as we move through life. I'm going to be thinking about this one for quite a long time. And wow, how great. It's wonderful. I hope everyone gets your book and works with these core beliefs. I think it's just such an interesting way to look at the world and how we perceive it and to be able to ask ourselves questions rather than just make assumptions. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sincere when I say the gratitude is all mine. I appreciate the way that you have the conversation, and I greatly appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have the conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Please share this with anyone you think might need to hear it. Andy's words of wisdom can really help someone who's struggling. And please like and subscribe and let us know how you overcame your biggest challenges in life. Thank you so much for joining us on I Care About You, and I'll see you again next time. And until then, know that I love you and I support you and I care about you, and we can get through this together.